It's painfully obvious to everyone who looks that all of human history is characterized by competition and cooperation at both the individual and group level, and that some individuals and groups have done significantly better than others. It therefore needs to be clearly explained what factors tip the balance in favor of one human society over another. At the individual level, it seems clear what factors lead to success within a single society. Strength, practical skills, high intelligence, confidence, and good looks are desirable. Feebleness, stupidity, depression, and ugliness are to be avoided if possible. Kindness and altruism within a group is usually highly respected. Selfishness is highly deplored. At the group level, however, success usually consists of being able to coordinate larger numbers of individuals. 100 weak, unintelligent, unskilled men can defeat 10 strong, intelligent, skilled ones with a calculatable probability. This is not just frivolous, it's extremely important for understanding the entire history of interactions between different human societies. If a society could coordinate large numbers of soldiers in the field to overwhelm smaller enemies, it did so, and these actions have almost always been sanctioned by the cultures of the societies performing them. Up until about 12,000 BC, all humans lived in bands of less than 200 people each, scattered across the globe hunting wild animals and gathering wild plants. Only a small fraction of the wild species we come across are edible to us. After the end of the last glacial maximum, the global climate gradually began to change and become more temperate. By 10,000 BC, this had led to a large plethora of wild plants that humans could eat, growing in suitable environments between latitudes 20 to 40. These plants included the 6 great grasses called cereals: wheat, barley, rice, millet, sorghum, and corn; the pulses or legumes, including the many types of beans, peas, lentils, etc., fruits, including bananas, olives, grapes, figs, date palms, etc., and vegetables like wild cabbage, turnips, carrots, radishes, tomatoes, cucumbers, gourds, etc. These wild plants thrived in the post-glacial environment and grew to occupy relatively large wild ranges in the Fertile Crescent, North Africa, India, China, and Mesoamerica. By this point, humans had some experience with domesticating wild species. The most familiar example is the dog. Wolves live in hunter-gatherer bands roaming across Eurasia and adhere to dominance hierarchies. Since wolves will naturally follow a master, and will imprint on humans as that master, some individual wolves whose brain chemistry gave them a greater propensity to tameness coexisted with human hunter-gatherers, and developed mutually beneficial relationships with them. By 10,000 BC, dogs existed on all continents which humans lived on, since human bands took their dogs everywhere with them. We can get a better idea of what happened by looking at the much more recent domestication of red foxes. In the 1940s, the biologist Dmitry Belyayev began experiments in Mendelian genetics, for which the Soviet government quickly sacked him. After the death of Stalin in 1953, they invited him back, and he began experiments to domesticate red foxes, which he succeeded in after 10 years. It's one of the few successful domestications that have taken place in modern times. He began with a group of 130 foxes, 100 females and 30 males, and began systematically selecting for tameness. By the 1960s, Belyayev had produced foxes who both behaved and resembled border collies, actively seeking human company and wagging their tails when approached. They developed black and white coats and floppy ears. Their reproductive hormone balance changed, and they began breeding all year round, rather than in a breeding season. Experiments also found that their brains contained much higher levels of the chemical serotonin. It took less than 20 years to turn foxes into dogs. The domestication of wolves may have happened much more slowly, since bands could not have been expected to be consciously breeding for genetic tameness, but nevertheless, the dogs that performed best with humans were the ones who happened to follow the pattern predicted and perfected by Belyayev. Also domesticated by 10,000 BC in some areas was the pig, which has an omnivorous diet like humans and wolves. Unlike humans and wolves, however, wild boars prefer to live isolated and don't group together into bands. They are very protective of their liberty and are not genetically equipped to cope with dominance hierarchies, again, unlike humans and wolves. Their intelligence has been compared to that of dolphins and chimpanzees, and the strength and fearsomeness of wild boars has been written about by many ancient and modern authors. Early modern humans engaged in cooperative pack hunting to take down wild boars with spears and eventually arrows. Just as many wild plant species became more common between latitudes 20 to 40 after 12,000 BC, so did many species of wild animals, including wild boars. In some areas of eastern Turkey and Syria, boars became so common that regular hunts could be conducted by hunter-gatherers, who also collected the abundant nearby wild emmer wheat. This abundance of food in a single area incentivized people to engage in longer-lasting settlements, and to take measures to protect the area from rival bands of hunter-gatherers who also desired the food resources. Hopelessly outcompeted, the predator-prey relationship between humans and pigs evolved into a master-slave relationship. Pigs changed in similar ways to dogs, with some individuals being tamer than others, and when these were found, they were kidnapped and enslaved by human hunters as breeding stock. This was a domestication process that took many generations over the course of centuries. The attitude towards pigs was one of reverence as well as disgust. The eating of pig flesh was considered something special, privileged. The domestication of cattle, sheep, goats, horses, camels, and humans works in a similar way, but had not begun yet on any identifiable scale. The earliest sedentary tribe that can be currently identified by archaeological evidence was a community called Kayanu in the foothills of the Taurus Mountains in southeastern Turkey. Kayanu was first settled around 10,200 BC by pig herders, or swine herders, who also collected nearby wild emmer wheat, which they both ate themselves and fed to their pigs. The inhabitants lived there permanently year-round, raising pigs to maturity and eating them, and hunting and collecting any wild materials which they could make use of. Specialized tools were developed for cultivating and preparing wheat grains. Wheat is a terrific example to explain how plant domestication works, since it is the most common cereal and because all cereals followed a similar process in different parts of the world, except corn. Many cereals and pulses reproduce by breaking off their stalks or pods and shattering them on the ground, dispersing their seeds nearby. There seems to be specific genes programming the breaking off behavior and different specific genes programming the shattering behavior. Some wild mutants of these crops, however, don't have the genes for shattering and cannot reproduce naturally, but it was these non-shattering mutants who were first selected and planted by human gardeners living in these tribal communities. These mutants would continue to reproduce non-shattering mutants which would continue to be planted by humans. Additional tribes began settling in nearby areas over subsequent centuries. Haran or Halan is first attested as a tribe around 9500 BC, centered around swine herding and gathering wild emmer wheat. A tribe called Muribet is found thriving by 9300 BC, engaging in heavy gazelle hunting and cultivating barley and rye cereals. Soon followed around 9200 by a tribe called Göbekli, obsessed with boar hunting and gazelle hunting. Gazelles were extremely abundant in the Fertile Crescent around this time, but they were never domesticated by humans. They don't seem to be able to develop the propensity for tameness that pigs do, and that dogs and humans much more easily do. Even modern biologists and zookeepers often give up attempting to keep gazelles, who will not allow themselves to be kept in zoos and often either die of shock or batter themselves to death against the fence in their attempts to escape. Finally, around 9000 BC, Navali Kori is settled, engaging in swine herding and cultivating einkorn wheat. These weren't every tribe founded in the region, but they represent the earliest, and at least early on, the most successful examples of settlement based on domestication in human history. Around 9000 BC, cattle was first domesticated by the villagers at Kayanu by selectively breeding the native Eurasian aurochs, which many of their neighbors hunted. Mitochondrial DNA analysis confirms that all Eurasian cattle living today are descended from 80 individuals domesticated at Kayanu. Cattle were enslaved like pigs and, along with grain, used as barter currency as far back as 9000 BC. Tribal societies traded regularly with one another, grew in confidence and prestige, and began evolving their unique cultural phenomena. In tribes, land is owned by an extended family or clan. Different clans within a tribe exchange marriage partners with one another. Tribes usually consist of 100 to a few hundred individuals. A few hundred people seems to be the upper limit on the human brain's capacity for distinguishing individuals. There is no formal law, police, or guard force, because when two people begin arguing, there are many people nearby related, or at least familiar with the two individuals with personal interest in stopping the fight. The anthropologist Jared Diamond relates what he saw in traditional New Guinea societies. Quote, "If a New Guinean happened to encounter an unfamiliar New Guinean while both were away from their respective villages, the two engaged in a long discussion of their relatives, in an attempt to establish some relationship and hence some reason why the two should not attempt to kill each other." End quote. Besides what has been said, tribes follow many of the same customs as the bands they evolved from. A good example of how tribal societies developed during this early period of civilization is the village of Jericho. According to archaeological evidence, it was first settled around 9600 BC by gazelle hunters, and over the subsequent 6 centuries developed unique mud brick and thatch housing, a functioning granary, a well-maintained cemetery, and a thriving religion based on ancestor worship. They cultivated nearby wild emmer wheat and barley. There were several burgeoning tribal hamlets evolving in the Jordan River Valley, the Jezreel Valley, and around the Sea of Galilee around this time. The larger villages in the Fertile Crescent began developing multi-room housing between 9000 BC and 8500 BC. Sheep and goats were first domesticated around this period, possibly in the region of Armenia, and then spread to the villages in eastern Turkey. Kayanu also began practicing human sacrifice, no doubt justified by the what in high heaven. Megalithic religious structures first appear, constructed by very powerful and insane people. Cobblestone walls began to be constructed, and by 8300 BC, Jericho had a circular stone wall that was 12 feet high and 5 feet thick. By 8000 BC, this wall had been extended to 17 feet in height and 7 feet in thickness, and by 7800 BC, they had built a citadel 28 feet tall. Finally, Murabet developed a system of counting using clay tokens that eventually developed into the abacus. One special tribe that began rising to prominence around this time was Byblos. Byblos is my favorite human settlement in the world. It was founded by hunters and fishermen around 8800 BC and continues to exist because of its excellent location. The tribe contributed greatly to technology over the next 1,000 years, and their early developments include advancements in arrowhead technology, the first known human harbor, and the first longboats, not including the Austronesians. They evolved the earliest plaster floors and had 2-story houses with ladders. Tribes spread into Anatolia around 8100 BC with the settlement called Aslaki Hoyuk. These people, like Byblos, had 2-story houses, and by 7500 BC, the site shows signs of a distinct class system, possibly the first in the world. This would indicate that during those 600 years the tribe was prosperous and became powerful enough to conquer and enslave someone else. Aslaki Hoyuk is divided into communities and neighborhoods with basic public buildings like a granary and cult house. By 7500 BC, many tribes existed in the Fertile Crescent, achieving various levels of success and engaging in some or another combination of pig, cattle, sheep, or goat domestication, and/or the cultivation of emmer wheat, einkorn wheat, barley, rye, and the fiber crop, flax. Flax was used as far back as 50,000 BC and was often used to create rope and fabrics for wealthy persons called linen. Artificial selection for flax in sedentary societies in Syria, beginning around 7500 BC, led to the crop growing in popularity, gradually becoming the main textile in the West, supplemented by sheep wool in many areas. By 7100 BC, Flax was being grown all over the Fertile Crescent, and linen would remain the most popular clothing option until AD 1794, when Eli Whitney patented his stolen Peruvian technology.